It was one of those ordinary afternoons that should have faded into memory without consequence. The kind of day where the sun hung lazily in the sky, heat rippling across the road, and cars sped past without notice. But destiny has a strange way of hiding life-changing moments in the middle of life's most mundane scenes. And on this stretch of asphalt, something far greater than a flat tire was about to unfold. Parked awkwardly on the shoulder was a gleaming luxury car, its polished chrome glinting in the sunlight. Its hazard lights flashing like a beacon of wealth suddenly brought low by inconvenience. Drivers who passed by slowed just enough to marvel at the sight of such an expensive vehicle stranded, then quickly pressed their accelerators, unwilling to be delayed by someone else's problem. Standing near the car was a well-dressed man with a furrowed brow, his phone held limply in one hand, as if he had already given up on help arriving anytime soon. But from across the street came another figure, one who looked so unassuming, so small against the backdrop of wealth and polished metal, that most might not have noticed him at all. He was a young black boy, his clothes a little worn, his shoes scuffed from long walks, and his hands calloused from doing chores that were never optional. Where others saw only a problem too big to solve, he saw an opportunity to lend a hand, and with quiet determination, he approached the stranded vehicle. Yet not everyone viewed his kindness with respect. Leaning against her SUV a few yards away, sipping on an iced coffee with smugness plastered across her face, was the neighborhood's self-appointed queen of cruelty, a woman whose entitled glare could make others shrink, a woman who lived for putting others down, a woman many already whispered about with one word, Karen. And when she saw the boy crouch down to inspect the flat tire, she let out a laugh so sharp it cut through the air like broken glass. That laugh was not one of amusement, but of mockery, laced with disdain and coated in racism, the kind of sound that sought not to entertain but to humiliate. "Look at him," she scoffed loudly enough for everyone to hear, her voice dripping with venomous delight, though the boy kept his eyes down and his focus steady. With every chuckle, every sarcastic remark about knowing his place, she turned what should have been an ordinary act of kindness into a public stage for her prejudice. The few bystanders nearby shuffled uncomfortably, some whispering, some even smirking nervously, their silence allowing her cruelty to echo louder than it should. To her, this wasn't just a boy helping a man in need, this was an opportunity to remind him, and everyone watching, of the hierarchy she believed in. A world where wealth and skin color determined value, and where kindness from someone she considered beneath her was nothing more than a joke. But what Karen didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that the very scene she mocked was about to flip into something unforgettable, a moment where arrogance would be shattered, where the boy's quiet determination would outshine her cruelty, and where the man with the flat tire would reveal a truth so shocking it would ripple through their lives like a thunderclap. Because sometimes, the ones the world overlooks are the ones destiny has been waiting to lift, and sometimes, the cruelest laugh ends up echoing back at the one who started it. The boy's name was Malik, a child of just 13. Though life had already asked him to shoulder burdens that made him seem much older. And while other kids his age spent their afternoons with video games or sports, Malik often walked the cracked sidewalks of his neighborhood searching for odd jobs to bring home a few extra dollars for his mother, who worked long hours just to keep their modest apartment livable. The grocery store down the street knew him as the kid who carried bags for tips. The elderly neighbors called him dependable, but to people like Karen, he was nothing more than a reminder of the prejudices she clung to, a reminder of what she thought didn't belong in their suburb. Malik's clothes never matched the crisp perfection of the wealthy kids at school. His shoes were worn at the edges, and though he walked with quiet humility, his eyes carried a spark of intelligence and dignity that no amount of hardship could extinguish. It was this spark that drew him toward the stranded millionaire's car. A subconscious belief that kindness was never wasted, even when the world gave him so little in return. The setting itself was almost cinematic, the black asphalt shimmering under the relentless sun, the luxury vehicle gleaming like a diamond dropped in the dirt, and Karen's shadow looming over it all, her sunglasses lowered just enough to watch. Malik, with the same look she reserved for HOA complaints, store cashiers, or anyone she deemed beneath her. In her mind, a black boy touching such an expensive car was laughable. An image she couldn't resist mocking, and so she did, loudly, cruelly, as though she were auditioning for an audience. Her voice carried across the parking lot, drawing, in curious glances, each word meant to reduce Malik's act of kindness into something embarrassing. As though compassion itself could be a flaw. Malik didn't flinch, though his heart raced. Because he had grown used to the sound of prejudice hurled his way, the cutting whispers at school, the suspicious looks in stores, the constant reminder that some people didn't want him to forget where they thought he belonged. And yet, with every insult, he tightened the bolts on the spare tire, his small hands moving with determination, because deep down, he believed that actions spoke louder than cruelty. The millionaire, standing quietly nearby, observed the entire scene, his sharp eyes narrowing not at Malik's effort but at the venom dripping from Karen's lips. And though he said nothing for now, the wheels of judgment were already turning in his mind. The air felt heavy with contradiction. A boy giving without expectation. A woman tearing him down without reason. And a wealthy man caught in the middle of a moment that would decide more than just whether his car could move again. What no one realized was that this simple, sun-drenched parking lot was about to become a stage for something much greater than a flat tire. It would reveal the true measure of character, expose the ugliness of prejudice, and set into motion a chain of events that would change Malik's life forever. As Malik worked, sweat dripping down his forehead, and his small hands straining against the stubborn bolts, Karen's laughter only grew sharper, echoing across the parking lot like a jeer meant to pierce through his focus. And with every mocking remark, she seemed to draw strength from the discomfort of those around her, feeding on the silence of bystanders who chose not to intervene. "Isn't it just perfect?" she called out sarcastically to no one in particular, her voice laced with poison, a poor little boy playing mechanic for a car he could never afford. Her words hung heavy in the hot air, twisting Malik's simple act of kindness into a public spectacle, and though he tried to tune her out, each insult landed like a stone against his chest, stirring memories of the countless times teachers had assumed less of him, store clerks had watched him like a thief, or kids at school had mocked his worn clothes. The injustice was not just in her words, but in the way others stood by, pretending to check their phones or busy themselves with carts. Their avoidance, a silent approval of her cruelty. Malik clenched his jaw, reminding himself that he wasn't fixing the tire for her, or for the crowd, but because he believed helping others mattered even when no one believed in him. Still, the weight of her voice was relentless. She ridiculed his mother, saying she must be so proud to raise a boy who knows his place. She scoffed at the idea that kindness could come from someone like him, painting his generosity as desperation, as though his skin color and poverty erased the dignity of his choice. The millionaire remained quiet, his expression unreadable, but his eyes followed every move, every insult. As though he were recording the truth of what was happening, with each rotation of the tire iron, Malik fought back not just the metal, but the urge to crumble under her attacks. Because deep down, he knew, if he faltered, if he showed weakness, it would only feed her hatred. The sun bore down hotter, the pavement seemed to vibrate with tension, and Karen's taunts grew more venomous. "Look at him, sweating like that. You'd think he owned the car, the way he's pretending. Pathetic." Some nearby shoppers snickered nervously, not out of agreement but out of fear of standing against her. And Malik realized that sometimes racism thrived not only in the voices of the cruel, but in the silence of the indifferent. His arms ached, his back throbbed, but he refused to stop. Because finishing the job meant proving to himself, more than anyone, that her words didn't define him. The injustice of the moment was suffocating. A boy offering kindness, being ridiculed, the community too afraid to step in. A woman drunk on her own entitlement, and a wealthy man holding back, waiting for the right moment. Malik's heartbeat quickened. Not just from the strain, but from the awareness that he was standing in the center of something much larger than a flat tire. He was standing in the middle of a story that carried the weight of centuries of prejudice. A story where one person's cruelty became a mirror for society's silent complicity. And just as Karen laughed louder, as though victory were already hers, Malik tightened the last bolt with a snap that seemed to cut through the air like defiance itself, lifting his head for the first time to meet her gaze. His expression was calm but unbroken, a silent challenge to her venom. And though she smirked as if she had one, deep down, cracks had already begun to form in the mask of her arrogance, because she and everyone watching was about to learn that sometimes the smallest act of kindness has the power to shatter the largest walls of hate. When Malik finally stood up, wiping his brow with the back of his hand, the tire now fixed and the car ready to move, Karen burst into laughter once again, louder than before, her voice booming across the lot like a cruel drumbeat designed to remind everyone who she thought held power. And she shook her head dramatically as if the boy's efforts were the punchline to her personal comedy show. "Oh, look at you," she sneered, her tone so sharp it cut the air. "Sweating buckets just to impress some rich guy who won't even thank you. This is what happens when people like you don't know your place." Her words slashed deeper than the heat of the sun, dripping with the same venom that had followed Malik his whole life. Yet instead of anger, a strange stillness washed over him, as if all of her noise had finally become just that noise, meaningless and hollow. But the crowd that had gathered was far from still. Murmurs rippled through the onlookers, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others fumbling with their phones to record the spectacle, and while a few faces showed discomfort at Karen's brazenness, no one dared speak up, their silence ringing almost as loudly as her insults. The millionaire, however, had seen enough. He stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking against the asphalt, his tall frame commanding attention without needing to raise his voice. And with one look at Malik's tired but unbroken face and another at Karen's twisted smirk, he made a decision that would change everything. "Young man," he said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority, "you've done more than fix a tire today." Karen rolled her eyes dramatically, letting out a scoff that carried all the arrogance she could muster. "Oh, please," she snapped. "Don't encourage him. He's probably hoping you'll toss him a couple of bucks like some stray." Honestly, the audacity, it's pathetic. The silence that followed her words was suffocating. The kind that presses against your chest and makes the air feel heavy. And then the millionaire reached into his pocket, pulling out a sleek wallet that gleamed under the sunlight. For a moment, Karen smirked, convinced her prediction was correct, certain he would hand over a small bill to the boy and walk away, reinforcing her belief in hierarchy and worth. But instead, he withdrew not money but a crisp business card embossed with gold lettering, the kind that immediately screamed importance, and held it out toward Malik with steady hands. "My name," he said, his voice rich with gravitas, "is Charles Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Industries." Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave crashing against rocks. The name was known, associated with wealth, philanthropy, and influence. A man whose signature had the power to move millions. Karen's smirk faltered, her lips parting in shock before she quickly tried to recover, plastering on a strained laugh. "Oh, so what? A CEO? That doesn't change the fact, this boy is nothing more than but." Before she could finish, Whitmore's gaze cut to her with the precision of a blade, his eyes narrowing in a way that silenced her instantly. "Enough," he said firmly, and though his tone never rose above calm, it carried the kind of authority that left no room for argument. Turning back to Malik, he continued, "What you've shown here is character, something money cannot buy, and power cannot fabricate. You saw someone in need and helped without hesitation, without expectation, despite the cruelty thrown your way. That is the kind of strength I respect." He pressed the card into Malik's trembling hand, and in that moment, the boy's world seemed to spin. Whitmore wasn't just offering gratitude, he was offering opportunity. "Come see me next week," he added, his eyes softening with sincerity. "I want to make sure your kindness doesn't go unnoticed. A future like yours deserves to be built on more than hardship." The crowd erupted into hushed whispers. their phones now capturing not just Karen's cruelty, but her unraveling humiliation. And her face flushed crimson, as if the very sun was burning her arrogance away. She stammered, trying to regain footing. You can't be serious. He's just a. But no one listened anymore. Her words had become powerless, her mockery meaningless, exposed for the emptiness it truly was. Malik stood frozen, staring at the card in his hand, his chest heaving as the weight of possibility crashed into him like a tidal wave. And for the first time in his young life, he felt sentient, as poor, not as lesser, not as the target of prejudice, but as someone whose worth had been acknowledged by a man the world respected. Karen's laughter, which once dominated the air, was gone now, replaced by the sound of her shallow breathing, and the murmurs of a crowd that now looked at her with disgust instead of agreement. The tables had turned so swiftly it was almost poetic. The woman who had mocked a boy's kindness was left standing in the ashes of her own arrogance. Stripped of the illusion of superiority she had clung to so tightly, Whitmore placed a firm hand on Malik's shoulder, nodding with reassurance before turning back to his car, his voice carrying one last message that lingered in the heat of the day. Sometimes, true wealth is not measured in what you have, but in how you treat those around you. With that, he stepped into his car, its engine roaring to life, leaving behind a silence more powerful than Karen's cruelest words. The crowd dispersed slowly, but not without casting Karen long, condemning stares, their whispers cutting deeper than any insult she had thrown. Malik, still holding the card as if it were made of glass, felt a mixture of disbelief and pride swelling inside him. His act of kindness, now a turning point in his life. And Karen, who had laughed the loudest, was now the most silent, standing alone in the parking lot, her power drained, her mask shattered. Humiliated not by Malik, but by the truth her cruelty had exposed. As the dust of the moments settled, and the hum of everyday life slowly returned to the parking lot, Malik stood rooted in place, the golden embossed business card still trembling in his hand like a fragile key to a future he never dared to imagine. And though the millionaire's car disappeared down the road, the echo of his words remained etched in the air, filling Malik's heart with something unfamiliar yet undeniable hope. Hope that perhaps his life was not destined to be defined by struggle, ridicule, or the color of his skin, but by the quiet strength of his choices and the resilience of his spirit. Karen, who only minutes earlier had laughed with such venomous confidence, now shrank into herself. Her sunglasses no longer a shield but a mask of shame. Her head bowed under the weight of the disgusted glances that followed her every move. And for once, her voice, so often the loudest in the room, was silenced by the truth of her own humiliation. The bystanders, who had at first stood frozen in the safety of silence, began to murmur among themselves, their tones no longer nervous but reflective, as though they had been forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that standing idle in the face of cruelty was its own kind of complicity. Some walked away with guilt, others with resolve, but none could deny that they had witnessed a lesson that reached far beyond a flat tire. Malik walked slowly toward home, each step heavy not with exhaustion but with the dawning realization that his small act of kindness had been more powerful than any insult hurled at him. That his dignity had triumphed over mockery, and that even in a world so often tilted against him, there were moments when justice could pierce through the darkness like sunlight breaking through clouds. That evening, when he handed the card to his mother and told her what had happened, tears welled in her eyes, not just tears of pride, but of vindication. Because for years she had told her son that kindness was never wasted. Even when it felt like the world rewarded cruelty instead, she held him tightly, whispering that this was only the beginning. That sometimes the smallest choices lead to the biggest doors opening, and in that moment, Malik believed her. Karen, meanwhile, became the subject of whispers in the neighborhood. She once ruled with arrogance, her laughter no longer feared but pitied, her name associated not with authority but with disgrace. A living reminder that prejudice never humiliates the victim but always exposes the ugliness of the one who clings to it. The story of the parking lot spread as stories often do in the age of smartphones and social media. And soon the video clip surfaced online, Karen sneering, Malik working with quiet determination, Whitmore stepping forward to silence her and reward the boy's kindness. Within days, the narrative shifted from a moment of cruelty to a movement of inspiration. People sharing Malik's story as a testament to the truth that dignity, perseverance, and compassion are stronger than hate. And yet, beyond the viral views and the headlines, the most important impact remained deeply personal. A boy who now saw his future not as a shadowed path of limitations but as a horizon wide with possibility. His story reminded everyone who heard it that no act of kindness is ever too small to matter, that injustice thrives only when silence protects it, and that the greatest transformations often begin in the most unexpected places with the most ordinary people. And so the question lingers, not just for those who watched in that parking lot, but for all of us. When faced with cruelty, do we shrink back in silence, or do we choose to stand in the quiet, unshakable strength of kindness and justice? Because, in the end, Karen's laughter faded, but Malik's act of compassion became something immortal. A living echo of the truth that, while hate may shout loudly, it is dignity that always has the final word. On a scorching afternoon, where the asphalt shimmered under the punishing sun, a 13-year-old boy named Malik carried himself with a quiet resilience that belied his age, his worn shoes scuffing the pavement as he walked home from yet another day of odd jobs, his hands roughened not by play but by responsibility. For while many boys his age dreamed only of video games and carefree afternoons, Malik's life demanded sacrifice, helping his mother keep their modest apartment afloat. And though his clothes hung loose and faded, his spirit held a dignity that poverty could not strip away. It was this spirit that drew him to the sight of a stranded luxury car, sitting like a jewel in the dust of a grocery store parking lot. Its driver a man in a pressed shirt, an expensive watch, looking on helplessly at a flat tire, and without hesitation Malik bent to help. His small hands working with determination, though the tools felt oversized in his grip. Unaware that the simple act of kindness would set into motion a chain of events that would forever alter his path. Yet from across the lot stood Karen, a woman whose very presence seemed to drip with entitlement, the self-appointed queen of her neighborhood homeowners association, notorious for her sharp tongue and disdainful glares, and as she lowered her sunglasses to watch Malik kneeling beside the millionaire's car, a laugh escaped her lips, high-pitched and cruel, a laugh that echoed not just in the parking lot but in Malik's ears as a familiar song of prejudice he had endured all his life. For Karen saw not a boy helping out of compassion, but a black child who dared to touch what she considered untouchable. And her voice rose above the hum of traffic, mocking his sweat-soaked effort, painting his kindness as desperation, throwing out venomous remarks meant to remind him of his place, each word slicing deeper than the hot air pressing down upon him. Yet Malik, though his chest burned with both heat and humiliation, did not stop. He had heard those tones too many times before, in the classrooms where teachers underestimated him, in stores where clerks followed him with suspicious eyes, in playgrounds where whispers spread like weeds, and, though each memory weighed heavily, he had long since decided that cruelty would not dictate his character. So he tightened each bolt with unshaken hands, his silence speaking louder than Karen's jeers. A crowd began to form, drawn by her theatrics, their eyes shifting uncomfortably as they recorded with phones but offered no words of defense, their silence hanging heavy in the air, complicity disguised as curiosity, and though some glanced at Malik with sympathy, none dared step forward. For prejudice often thrives, not only on the cruelty of the loud, but on the passivity of the quiet. At last, Malik rose, wiping the grime from his forehead, his task complete, only to be met with another burst of Karen's laughter, her voice dripping with scorn as she proclaimed him foolish for exhausting himself for a stranger who, in her mind, would never see him as anything but lesser. Her words designed to cut him down before the crowd as though his dignity was something she could strip away with syllables. But it was then that the driver, who had been silent until now, stepped forward with a calm authority that stilled the murmurs, his presence commanding attention not through volume but through weight, and with steady hands he reached into his Pocket not for loose change, as Karen gleefully predicted, but for a sleek business card embossed with golden letters, and handed it to Malik, introducing himself as Charles Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Industries, a name so powerful it sent ripples through the onlookers as recognition spread, for here was a man whose decisions influenced entire cities, whose philanthropy made headlines. And yet he stood acknowledging not Karen's arrogance, but Malik's quiet act of kindness. Karen's face drained of color, her smirk faltering as she stammered in disbelief. But Whitmore silenced her with a glance so sharp it cut her louder than any rebuke, and his words, directed at Malik, carried across the lot. That character mattered more than status, that true strength lay in compassion, that dignity could not be bought or diminished, and that Malik's choice to help spoke volumes about the man he would one day become. The card trembled in Malik's hand like a ticket to possibility, his heart racing as he realized that his future, so long shadowed by limitations, might finally be widening into light. And as Whitmore departed, leaving behind the hum of an engine and the weight of his message, the crowd shifted, their eyes no longer on Malik as the target of mockery, but on Karen, their stares sharp with judgment, their whispers condemning her cruelty, her name transforming in an instant from authority to disgrace. Malik walked home that evening with the card pressed tightly in his palm, each step lighter than the last, until he reached his mother and recounted what had happened. Watching as tears filled her eyes, not of sadness, but of vindication, for she had always told him that kindness was never wasted, even when the world seemed to reward only cruelty. And now her son stood before her with proof that decency could prevail. In the days that followed, the story spread beyond the lot. The footage, capturing Karen's mockery and Whitmore's revelation going viral, sparking conversations about dignity, prejudice, and the quiet power of compassion, yet beyond the headlines and the shares, the truest impact lay within Malik himself, who now understood that he was not invisible, that even against laughter and hate, his choices carried weight, and that the worth of a life is never determined by those who mock it, but by those who rise above. Karen, meanwhile, found herself isolated, her laughter remembered only as cruelty, her pride dismantled by her own arrogance, a living lesson that prejudice humiliates not its target but its source. And so Malik's story endures, not as a tale of chance, but as a reminder that the smallest act of kindness can disarm the loudest cruelty. That silence in the face of injustice is itself a choice, and that sometimes the most ordinary moments reveal extraordinary truths. Because in the end, Karen's laughter faded into nothing, but Malik's dignity became unforgettable. Proof that while hate may shout, it is kindness and courage that echo the longest. And so, I leave you with this question. When faced with cruelty, will you choose to stay silent like the crowd, or will you rise like Malik? Proving that strength is not in power or wealth, but in the simple act of doing what is right. The answer, perhaps, defines more than just the story. It